All right. Well, good morning again.
Good morning.
It's even better to be here than it was earlier because I love those songs that we sang. I love just worshiping together in song. Even though I am the epitome of, thank you, of make a joyful noise to the Lord. I'm not exactly a world-class singer. Yeah, as a few of us, the joyful noise crowd. I wonder, like when you're a parent and you're, okay, so this had nothing to do with my message, but I always wonder what God thinks of those of us who make the joyful noise, and really it's not, and for me, I'm not a good singer. I'm tone deaf, so I'm not a very good singer. And like, how does God feel about that? And I think the only thing I can think of is when you're a parent and your kid is like in 3rd grade and they have their first recorder concert, in school, and it's like squeak, 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 and all the parents are like, yay, that's so great, It's like, oh, when is this going to be over? But God probably thinks of us, we're cute, we're his kids, it's great, good job. It's not the gift I gave you, but that's okay. So working with student athletes is just a total joy. One of the things that I enjoy about it is I'm a pretty big sports guy. And so the language that we tend to use with students, at least in our ministry, is sports related. People ask me, do you need to be an athlete to be involved in Athletes in Action at UConn? And I say, no. But if you don't like sports at all, it's probably not the place for you, because we talk in the language of sport all the time. So today's message is titled Touchdowns and Turnovers, and it's got a sports theme to it. So I want to start off by sharing a couple of very quick stories. First one is about a guy named Alex Holmes. He used to play football for the University of Southern California, and he once described what it was like to score a touchdown. He had run out for a pass pattern, caught a pass from his quarterback. That in that day was Carson Palmer, who ended up becoming a pretty big-time NFL quarterback. And here's how Holmes described it. He said, at that moment, things just changed. I don't really get a chance to score that many touchdowns, but the ones that I get, there's no real explanation for how it feels. It's like you're elevated to another plane of existence. The moment just washes over you, and you think, man, this is just the perfect moment. It's the one moment in a game where everyone is looking at you, as opposed to another play where people are focused here or there. There's just no feeling like it. Your senses get dull. I'm sure the crowd was cheering, but I couldn't hear anything. I was just so excited. I didn't know how to react. I was in shock at first and didn't do anything, and then my teammates started coming up to celebrate, so I celebrated too. After the shock wore off, I could hear how loud the crowd was cheering, but for the first 5 minutes or so, I didn't hear anything. It was just pure joy. I ran to the sidelines with a huge grin on my face. Everyone was high-fiving me. I couldn't wait to go out there and do it again. So I want you to just imagine what that's like. I never played football. I don't know what it's like to score a touchdown. I certainly don't know what it's like to play in front of 80,000 people cheering your name. But that moment that he describes, like, his emotional state must have been at an all-time high for him. Now, I want to contrast that with this brief story by a guy named Ryan Matthews, who in 2016, he was playing for the Philadelphia Eagles, and he caught a pass with just under 3 minutes to go in a game against the Detroit Lions. His team, the Eagles, were up 2 points, and he fumbled the ball. Detroit recovered, went on to win the game. And so here's what Matthews said after the game. He said, I just can't let my teammates down, especially when my number's called like that. I have to be able to make a play and be smart. It hurts. It stings a lot. So I want you to contrast Holmes's elation with Matthews's utter dejection, right? Two completely different emotional states, right, in the same sport of football. We experience emotional highs and lows all the time, right? And it's certainly not limited to sports, right? All kinds of things can happen in our lives that cause a variety of emotions. In fact, probably just this week, you've experienced if you were to map your week emotionally, there would be a lot of highs and a lot of lows, and driven by all sorts of factors, right? You get a job you're applying for, and you're on a high. You get fired from a job, and you're on a low, right? You get a great grade in school, and you're really excited. Or The grade doesn't turn out quite the way you hoped it would, and you're really bummed, right? You have a great conversation with somebody, you're here, and or someone says something that really hurts, and so you're down here, right? We experience this stuff all the time. And I want to take this opportunity to ask the question, what are emotions and why do they matter? The scriptures are full of emotional language, right? So here's a few that speak to the reality of emotions in our lives. Ecclesiastes 3:4 says there's a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. Emotions. Philippians 4:6 says do not be anxious about anything. Anyone here ever been anxious about something? Anxiety is a real thing, right? It's a real emotion. Proverbs 15:8 says, a hot-tempered man stirs up strife. Anyone here ever been hot under the collar for something? Yep. Romans 12:15 says, rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. There's joy, there's sadness, there's anger, there's happiness, there's anxiety, there's just emotions that run the gamut. We are emotional creatures because we are made in the image of God. And God, believe it or not, is an emotional being himself. Romans 1:18 says, for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. Wrath is different than justice, right? God dispenses justice against evildoing, but wrath is a term that includes anger, right? God actually gets angry at sin. Right? It's not just that it's wrong. It's like a personal affront to God. God's also a compassionate God. Deuteronomy 32:36 says, for the Lord will vindicate his people and have compassion on his servants. In Matthew 9, Jesus looked out on the multitudes who were harassed and helpless. They were lost like sheep without a shepherd. And what does it say that Jesus felt for them? He had compassion on them. Grief. Psalm 78:40, how often they rebelled against him, God, in the wilderness and grieved him in the desert. God experiences grief and sadness. Love, John 3:16, for God so loved the world. Hate, you ever thought that God hates some things? Proverbs 6:16, there are 6 things that the Lord hates, and then it lists 6 things. Joy, Isaiah 62:5, for as a young man marries a young woman, so shall your sons marry you. And as the bridegroom rejoices over the bride, so shall your God rejoice over you. God experiences emotions too. And that may sound weird to us, right? We somehow think that God is like above the emotional realm. But he is a being that experiences emotions. And we, being made in his image, also experience emotions. Now here's the thing. God's emotions are always in line with reality. So when God gets angry about something, that means there's something legitimate to get angry about. The thing is, that's not true for us all the time. Right? Sometimes our emotions, while real, don't really connect to what's actually going on. Right? Have you ever been mad about something and it turns out there's really nothing to be mad about? Yeah, that happens to us, right? Because we're not perfect, right? Our internal emotional state doesn't always comport to reality, right? And that actually can be problematic for us sometimes, right? Jeremiah 17:9 puts it this way: the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? So like a lot of times we say, just trust your feelings, trust your emotions. Like, I don't know about that. Like, they're not necessarily reliable guides to reality. They're not always not accurate, but they're not always accurate, right? Which means, as a guide, it's like a map. Well, it's right some of the time. Like Route 32 really does come down, from Willimantic down to Norwich. Mm-hmm. But what about this road to get me here? Like, what if that was not accurate? It's like, can I really rely on the map, right? So here's the way I like to think about emotions. Emotions are essentially a check engine light that goes on in the car, right? You don't ever have the check engine light go on? Mm-hmm. Okay. Why does your check engine light go on?
You got to check something.
What do you got to check?
Something's wrong.
What's wrong?
Oh, something. I don't know.
I don't know, right? That's the idea, right? Exactly. Like the check engine light goes on, and I got to be honest. This is my beef with the car industry, just like my beef with the computer industry. Back in the day, like if something went wrong with your computer, it would just say error 3.22175, and I'm like, speak English. Like, I don't know what that means. Why, if they can code for the error message to pop up, why can't they just code that the error message that pops up says, hey, your hard drive's too full, it can't process the information, you gotta like delete some things. Like, why can't it just say that, right? So that then
somebody's not gonna make money.
Right. Hey, conspiracy theory here. Okay. You're onto something. Okay. So like with a check engine light, I feel the same way. Like if they can make a light go on that tells you something's wrong, why can't, especially with today's cars, right? I understand a 1966 Buick won't do that, but a 2023, Tesla ought to be able to do this, right? Where it pops up and says, look, here's the problem, right? But it doesn't do that. So we've got to take the vehicle into the shop, have them run their little test on it and say, oh, you have a bad O2 sensor. Well, why can't the car just tell me that, right? It doesn't just tell us that, right? It just says something's wrong. The check engine light is the light that tells us that something is going on. Now, if you're smart like me, what you end up doing when the check engine light goes on is you just cover it up with tape, pretend it's not even there. That's not very smart, actually, but actually a lot of people do something like that, right? They just ignore the check engine light, right? Just ignore it. Just pretend it's not on. But it's on for a reason, right? It doesn't just come on for no reason. And the problem is, even if you knew like, oh, I think it's my tire pressure gauge is not working right, but I know my tires are fine. With the light being on, it doesn't come on again if something else goes wrong, right? So by not dealing with it, you actually may be covering up a future worse problem, right? Because the check engine light's just going to be on. Oh yeah, now your engine's about to fry. It's no big deal, right? Check engine light's been on for a while, right? So here's the thing: we tend to ignore, our check engine light, which isn't a good thing, right? But our check engine light, it doesn't tell us what's going on. It tells us something's going on. And I think that's true with our feelings as well. Again, we experience massive highs and massive lows in terms of our emotional state. Sometimes our feelings, though, are just kind of messed up. They don't, as I said, they don't really comport to reality. So when you're a kid and your parents discipline you, right? How do you feel towards your parents in that moment? For the ones who are still under their parents' roof right here, I won't call you out, but for those of us who may have to go back a few years, remember those days, right? How do you feel towards your parents when you're being disciplined, especially if you are not 100% sure you agree with the discipline, right? Do you feel loved in that moment?
No.
You can be honest. You don't. What you feel is frustration, maybe anger, maybe a sense of this is not fair or this is not right? And oftentimes, kids feel like their parents are not caring well for them. Now, as parents, we definitely make mistakes. We don't always do everything right as parents, and sometimes we discipline not as effectively as we can, and we make errors too. But a good parent disciplines because they love, not as a sign that they don't love. But when you're the kid, you're not feeling that, right? You may get it later on in life. Oh, that's why they did that. That makes sense. I remember one time, one of our daughters, post, I don't know if it was graduation or prom night or something. There was some big event at school, and then a bunch of the kids were going to have a party afterward. And unbelievably, the parents of these other kids, there was a family member who owned a house in town, in a neighborhood, and that person was like the uncle of the kid. And they said, yeah, you can use my house. I'll let you have the house. I won't be there that night, but you can use the house sort of post. And we were like, no shot are you going to this. Why? Everyone's going to be there. I'm like, everyone's going to be there? Is there going to be an adult there? no, that's why then no, of course you can't go, right? So my daughter certainly wasn't feeling the love from us in that moment. We were the only parents who said no way, right? And we couldn't believe other parents were saying yes. We're like, you don't even have to be a Christian parent to recognize this is a bad idea. Mm-hmm. Only bad things can happen in this situation, right? But we held our ground as parents. Our daughter was really unhappy with us for a while, but you know what ended up happening was kind of word got around that she wasn't going, and then a couple of her other friends, their parents talked to us, and we told them why, and they were like, yeah, I think that makes sense. So then they couldn't go, and then actually the whole thing fell totally apart, which we were grateful for, right? But we were like, man, there's no way. But in that moment, she did not feel loved by us. In retrospect, she was very happy that she didn't go, because she wasn't even, as she looked back on it, even she recognized that it wasn't a great situation. And some kids were going to stay the night. I'm like, you people are insane, right? And not just the kids. I can understand the kids want to do it, but the parents who would have allowed that, just mind-boggling stuff, right? So anyway, we stood our ground because we loved our kid. It didn't feel like that to her at the time, right? Our emotions very often don't line up with reality. So I want you to imagine a train, an old school coal-powered locomotive, right? Most of us can picture this. We'll make it simple, a 3-car train. You have the engine here, you have the coal car in the middle, and then you have passenger car, or caboose at the end, right? The way the train works is that the coal gets shoveled into which of the other 2 cars? The locomotive, right? Because that's where the massive steam-powered engine is. And the coal is the fuel, fires the boiler, creates the steam, powers the locomotive. What happens to the train if you put the coal in the caboose? You have a dirty caboose, right? And the train just sits there, right? That's all that happens. So the coal has to go into the engine for the train to run properly. So I love this analogy as you label the locomotive fact, you label the coal car faith, and then you label the caboose feelings. The feelings are not unimportant. They're part of the train. They're part of our life. They matter. But if we put our faith in our feelings, and our feelings are up and down, even our feelings towards God are up and down, right? You get the job that you've been praying for, you feel so grateful to God. You don't get the job you've been praying for, and now you're angry with God. Right? God must not love me. He didn't give me this thing, right? Or he hasn't healed me from this illness that I've had for years. Why? What's going on, right? So our feelings, even towards God, can go up and down like crazy, right? What is our faith going to look like if we put our faith in our feelings? If you were to map that, what would our faith look like? Up and down or all over, right? It'd be Six Flags Superman roller coaster, right? Is what it would be, right? And I guess there's something fun about that, but that's not really how we want to live, right? We want to put our faith in the facts. We want to put our faith in what's true. So when God tells us he loves us, and there's nothing in this world that can separate us from his love, according to Romans, right? If that's what he says is true, what do I believe? Do I believe what my feelings are telling me in the moment? Or do I believe what God says is true? Right? We live in a world where feelings have become the ultimate judge of everything. Well, I feel X, Y, and Z. Therefore, that must be true. If you stop and think, that's nonsense. Like, we know our feelings are not always reliable guides. We can all think of 100 examples in our lives where they haven't really lined up with reality, right? So why do we think that our feelings must be the judge of what's correct, right? If you stop and think, it's kind of crazy, but that's how the world operates. And I'm trying to say, we need to get away from that. The error that some people make is that they think that feelings don't matter at all. But I think the check engine light, as an analogy, really does work. Like, if I'm so angry, okay, so use the example of my daughter not being allowed to go to this party. Right? She was really upset. But the question is, why are you so upset? The check engine light is like blaring, right, in her life. It's screaming at her. Why is she so angry? Well, it turns out she wasn't really angry with us, and she didn't have a great reason to be angry with us. What she was feeling was embarrassment She was feeling left out. She was feeling like her friends are going to make fun of her. So she was really, the emotional check engine light was all about her personal insecurities with her friends. And you know what? Once you identify that, she had to take the car into the shop. They had to plug in the machine and have it spit out. Yeah, this is all about your insecurities, right? And your status among your friends in your friend group, right? Once she was able to identify that, she's like, oh, well, that now makes sense why I'm so frustrated and so disappointed and so hurt by this. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So we need to pay attention to that check engine light, but we need to figure out what it's trying to tell us, right? And trust the facts of the situation, not just what the feelings are telling us. So Psalm 13 is the main text, and we've got about 6 minutes to get through this. This is the text that I want to highlight. I'm going to read the whole thing. This is David, and he's going through a crisis. He's in a combative battle situation. He's not winning. Let's put it that way. So Psalm 13 says this: How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Light up my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death, lest my enemies say I have prevailed over him, lest my foes rejoice because I am shaken. We'll stop there for a minute. What's David feeling in this moment? Let's list all the kind of the emotions that pop up from that. What do you see there?
Forgotten.
He feels forgotten. He feels abandoned. Rejected. Yep, rejected. Yep. What else? Despair. Hopelessness. Yep. Yep. Look at the end of verse 4. Threatened. Yeah. He feels insecure, certainly. Right? He says, I am shaken to the core. Right? He is unsteady. He's unstable. He is in a very deep, dark place of despair. Right? He's angry with God. He feels let down by God. Right? He feels abandoned. He feels like God doesn't care. Like, God, if you cared, why are you letting my enemies triumph over me? Why are you hanging me out to dry here? It's not like I haven't talked to you about this, God, because I have, and you just are nowhere to be found. Right? We've probably all experienced something like this at times, right? But this isn't the end of the story for David. And so what ends up happening is we feel an emotion like this, and our tendency is to move away from God. Right? It makes sense, even on a human relational standpoint. If somebody in your life has abandoned you in your time of need, has let you down, has made you feel like they don't care, what motivation do you have for moving closer to them, for pursuing that relationship? Aren't you more likely to be, well, heck with you, like if you're going to leave me in this time of need that I have, right? Some friend you are, right? It makes sense that we would pull away. And so it would make sense that for David, he would pull away from God. But it's really interesting because that's not what happens, right? For David, he's acknowledging his feelings, but he's talking to God about them. That's what the psalm is. It's a prayer, right? He's going directly to God, and he's being honest about how he feels. He says, I feel abandoned. I feel hurt. I feel alone. I feel disappointed and discouraged and shaken, right, is the term he uses, right? He's being brutally honest with God. Not that God doesn't know this already, but for David to verbalize it is really important, right? And that's where I think we need to be really authentic. We need to be real about what we're feeling and try to figure out why we're feeling that way. But here's the rest of the psalm, right? After he says all these things, how shaken he is, how hurt he is, he says, starting in verse 5, he says, but I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. If David were on this 3-car train, he's putting his faith, he's putting the coal in the engine, right? He understands who God really is. He understands what God has done for him in the past, and he knows what's true. So I love this psalm because it gives us a great model for how to deal with our emotions. Not only with God, but even interpersonally. Right? Mom and Dad, I am feeling X, Y, and Z. Be totally authentic about how we're feeling. And it feels like you don't care about my situation very much. But I'm coming to talk to you about it because I know that you actually do care. But we need to talk about it. And I need to be real with you. That's how we handle these things, right? That's being authentic with our emotions, like David is. But it's putting our trust in what's true, not in what our feelings are telling us. So then it's like, so God or mom and dad or whomever, wife, husband, like, help me sort through these feelings because I can't really make sense of it. Help me figure out what's actually going on. Or go see somebody who's a pro at this, right? I see a counselor. Why? Because there are things that I deal with that I can't really sort through. And I need some help with it, right? So somebody who's a little more objective, who's got some training in this area, who can ask me the right questions that I don't even know to ask myself. And he helps me figure some of this stuff out, right? He's my car doctor. He's my emotion doctor, right? He's the one I go to, and how are you feeling about that? Well, here's how I'm feeling. And the last 3 or 4 more questions, and before you know it, I'm like, oh, so that makes sense as to why I'm feeling this way. Thank you, I appreciate that, right? So get some help, right? There's all kinds of resources and people out there who can help. The reason I bring all this up is because we are emotional beings. We are not, for those of you who remember the show, we are in Star Trek, like we are not Vulcan. You know, all logic all the time. We are very much Captain Kirk, right? We have emotions that come out in all sorts of ways, right? Part of being human is that we've got these emotional states, and they can be very, very powerful, right? And so we need to get a handle on them. It doesn't mean we can control our emotions. They just kind of pop up, right? They just are what they are, right? But what we do with those emotions and how we let them inform our lives can be very different, right? One from another in terms of how we deal with it. So I want to encourage you to be like David, right? Emotions are a good thing. Right? They tell us something's going on. So let's make sure we're figuring out what they're telling us. And let's make sure we're not disengaging from God, especially when the emotions are bad ones. They're not bad. The emotions aren't bad. When they feel negative, like I feel despair, right? The emotion's just telling us something's going on. So in that sense, it's a good emotion. But we could turn it into a bad thing, if that makes sense. I want to make sure I clarify that. So let's make sure we're shoveling the coal into the engine, right? Not into the caboose. Let's put our trust in what's true, but let's recognize that our emotions are telling us something, and we need to deal with those appropriately and draw near to God in that process. Does that make sense? All right, I'm going to say a quick prayer for us. Lord, thank you so much that you give us emotions. I wouldn't want to be just a robot. I wouldn't want to be just a Vulcan. I wouldn't want to be just a pure logic machine. I'm thankful that I can feel things. But I recognize that the things that I feel aren't always totally in line with reality. And so, Lord, I pray that we would make sure that we recognize when that check engine light has come on. We would put our faith in what's true and not just in how we feel, and that we would draw near to you in all circumstances, whether things are going great or whether things are hard. Thanks, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.